What is going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners, and we may still have 2 Monday night games left to go before we close out week 2. But it is never too early to start your waiver wire research. If you're commenting right now about why are you guys putting out this video so early, you're the ones that lose your league because you don't take the waiver wire seriously. Now, we've got several guys that we are going to be talking about at running back, wide receiver, and tight end that you might be needing to add this week. We got some streaming options at quarterback and defensive special teams. And I've got a few guys that we need to keep our eye on because we may need to start dropping them very soon. So let's go ahead and hop right into the information. Let's talk about running backs first on this week's waiver wire show. And we've got Raheem Mostert out of Miami going up against Buffalo this coming week. Now, his 11 carries last week led the team. Chase Edmonds not getting nearly as much as we saw in week 1. He also caught all 3 of his targets for 28 yards. Edmonds, 5 carries for 33 yards. And guess what? 28 of those yards came on 1 carry. We know that Mostert already has the connection with McDaniels from their time together in San Francisco. Are we going to see him start to get a little bit more of the workload? We know the explosiveness is there. Buffalo's going to be a tough defense, but he is a guy that I might try to stash for some upcoming matchups. Mark Ingram from New Orleans. Now, he's probably still widely available in a lot of leagues because Kamara being officially ruled out may have come late enough in the week that people weren't able to pick him up or didn't really think about it. So Ingram might still be out there for some of you, and they're going to be going up against Carolina this coming week. I think would be a really good matchup for him if Kamara ends up missing again. He's not going to help in the passing game, but I mean, he did get 60 rush yards on only 10 attempts this past week. Going up against Carolina could end up being a really nice matchup for him if Kamara is not able to make it back. Jeff Wilson and Tyrion Davis-Price from San Francisco going up against Denver this week. I don't know if I'm adding either of these guys, but I'm definitely going to be mentioning them for you because they split carries essentially. Last week, we had 18 carries going to Wilson. We had 14 going to Davis-Price. And let's add in the fact that Deebo Samuel continues to get touches out of the backfield as well. Really what this is we're going to start one of these guys, and we have to hope that they score a touchdown to essentially get double-digit points in any given week. I mean, Jeff Wilson, I believe, was right around 11 fantasy points, but he didn't really do a whole lot. Yeah, he had 80 yards on the ground, but I mean, if you don't at least catch a couple of passes, you're not going to break 10 fantasy points unless you score a touchdown, if that's all you're getting as well. So with carries essentially being split and the fact that you're going to be adding in Deebo as well, for me personally, I'm not really high on either of them. Now, I think we also have to keep in mind with the Trey Lance injury, he's not going to be running. Jimmy Garoppolo isn't going to run nearly as much as Trey Lance would have. So that could help Jeff Wilson just a little bit. So if you want to go out and grab him, if you really need some depth help, Jeff Wilson would be the one of the 2 guys that I pick out of this group. Tyler Allgears. Somebody gave me that nickname in the comments last week, and I wrote it down and I lost it. So if you were the one that came up with that nickname, appreciate you. We'll see if we can make it a thing. Tyler Allgears from Atlanta. They get Seattle this week. He split carries with Patterson, each of them getting 10 apiece. And we know that, Patterson's 32 years old. He might be worn down a little bit as the season goes on. So Tyler Allgeier, if you're wanting to grab him, kind of hold him for right now, stash him. He's not going to really be fantasy viable unless Patterson ends up being out, but might still be a guy in deeper leagues to keep an eye on. And my Fantrax find of the week. Thanks again to our friends over at Fantrax for being a sponsor for us again this season. If you're doing any type of fantasy league, make sure you go over to Fantrax. Use code word Headliners when you create that league so they know we sent you over. So Darrell Williams is going to be my Fantrax find of the week. They're going to be going up against the Los Angeles Rams, which I don't love the matchup for him. But Connor appears to be down with an ankle injury. Now, talking to our very own Dr. Ethan Turner, and if you haven't had a chance to do so yet, become a member here on the channel so you can get into our Discord. Dr. Ethan giving up-to-the-minute updates, essentially, on any type of injuries that are going on. And he did talk to us a little bit about this as well last night and said Connor's got a history of ankle injuries and they can tend to linger for a little bit. So we might see James Conner miss some time coming up. Williams had 59 yards on 8 carries and a touchdown in week 2. Again, I don't love the matchup against the Rams, but if he's going to be the starting running back for Arizona for the next week, 2 weeks, whatever it may be, keep an eye on what happens with James Conner. This is going to be the guy you're essentially going to want to grab. Let's move to the wide receiver position. We got a ton of wide receivers to talk about this week. We got 10 of them. And I was going to make Garrett Wilson my Fantrax find of the week, but more than likely he's probably owned in quite a few leagues. Now keep in mind, I try to keep the guys in this video to right around 50% owned, maybe some guys around 60% owned across the board. But if you see anybody on here and you say, hey, Kyle, this guy's owned everywhere, why would you include him? I don't know, take it up with the fantasy platforms because they don't say that he's owned enough. So for Garrett Wilson, last week, 14 targets, caught 8 of them, 102 yards, scored a couple tutties, 22 targets over the first 2 weeks of the season. Do we have a new number 1 in New York? Would I be surprised? No. He was my wide receiver 1 in the draft. I knew we had this type of talent, but we had Elijah Moore, we had Corey Davis, and we had no idea how the running back situation was going to work out. When does Zach Wilson come back? All of these are questions that we might have to figure out with New York over the coming weeks, but let's figure them out with Garrett Wilson on our team. Josh Palmer from the Los Angeles Chargers, his touchdown late in the game last week is really what saved his fantasy value. If he hadn't scored that, he would have been a huge bust last week. But he could be available for managers that are dealing with injuries and different things that they have going on. He still had 8 targets last week. Keep an eye on it, especially with Keenan Allen still working his way back. Ashton Dulin is becoming the number 2 in Indianapolis. Now, we've got Pittman out this past week with the quad injury. Does he end up missing another week? Dulin has cleared himself. He's the guy. He's the number 2. He was the number 1 this past week for the most part. 13 targets over the last couple of weeks, and then he also had 79 receiving yards in week 2. He is a guy in deeper leagues or leagues that you have to run out 3 wide receivers. He should be owned moving forward. Sterling Shepard for the New York Giants. If you're looking for a team's wide receiver 1, it's going to be Sterling Shepard. He's still out there in a majority of leagues, 14 targets over the first 2 weeks. The Giants' offense is a mess, though, so there's not a whole lot of upside here. But hey, in a PPR league, take a look at it. Chris Olave from New Orleans, another guy that might be a little bit too owned, but a lot of people might have panicked and dropped him after he only had 3 targets in week 1. 13 targets in week 2. They really tried to force feed him down the field a little bit more this past week. I absolutely love that game plan to stretch the field. Keep an eye on that moving forward. Russell Gage. Yes, we saw Scotty Miller lead the team in targets this past week, considering Mike Evans was tossed out of the game. Julio hurt. Godwin not ready yet. Is Evans going to see a suspension? Because technically he was on the bench and then he came onto the field to lay out Marshawn Lattimore. Does he see any type of a suspension? Russell Gage is the guy that if all of these people were to miss next week, Russell Gage could be the wide receiver 1. Jahan Dotson for Washington. Terry McLaurin we know is too high owned. Curtis Samuel is now too high owned. That leaves Jahan Dotson as kind of the next guy up there. Probably still around the 50 to 60% mark owned in most fantasy leads. I mean, he might be the number 2 on this team right now. 3 touchdowns in the first 2 games. McLaurin and Samuel will probably have higher targets on a weekly basis, but Jahan Dotson is going to hold the big play upside every time he's on the field. Nico Collins for Houston, 9 targets. Second on the team in week 2. Will likely continue to see those type of targets, be the number 2 in that offense. The hope is we can start to see Houston get into the red zone a little bit more because that's where Nico Collins could start to make a little bit more of a name for himself. Greg Dortch from Arizona going up against the Rams this week. This is really only for deeper leagues because we know Dortch is going to be limited in his time as kind of the number 2, number 3 option because at some point Hopkins is going to come back. You've already got Marquise Brown. You've got Zach Ertz. And then when you add in Hopkins, there's just not going to be enough to go around. Dortch for me is a very limited time offer. Noah Brown from Dallas, 5 targets, 5 receptions, 91 yards in week 2 plus a touchdown. We've got, obviously, people down all over the place. Gallup hasn't worked his way back yet. Dalton Schultz, he's got a knee injury, it looks like. How long is he going to miss? Noah Brown is a guy to keep an eye on. If more guys continue to miss, especially if one of them is Dalton Schultz, he might be a guy moving forward that we do take a look at in like wide receiver 3 leagues where you're starting 3 of them. Let's move on to the tight end position now. 3 guys at tight end. Gerald Everett, 14 targets over the first 2 weeks, including a touchdown in week 1. No Keenan Allen means Everett is also going to be looked at. He's kind of the number 2 on this team with no Keenan Allen. He was number 2 really this past week over Josh Palmer. Now, will there be like significant targets? Are we talking like double-digit targets every week? No, but to see him get anywhere from 6 to 8 is not crazy. 6 to 8 targets in tight end land is more than enough to be fantasy viable. Pat Freiermuth, another guy that might be a little bit on the higher owned side. He's down in like the 40s on a few platforms I saw. 7 targets this past week, was second on the team, and he caught the touchdown. So his week this past week was not as good as I would have hoped. I thought he was really going to have a big week with no Najee Harris. After we knew Najee Harris was going to be back, maybe move him down in the rankings just a little bit. But Pat Freiermuth is a guy that I think we're going to continue to see kind of be that number 2 in the offense. That's what he is right now behind Deontay Johnson. Hopefully that keeps up for him. And Juwan Johnson from New Orleans. This was brought up last week. I'm going to give a shout out to one of our viewers out there. Again, I don't remember the name. I apologize. You asked me about Juwan Johnson, and I kind of gave you the same explanation I'm going to give right now. I'm not running out to add Juwan Johnson. You had mentioned in the video last week that his snap percentage is very high. Well, last season, for a multiple week stretch, he was on the field for 80% of the snaps, and he wasn't getting any targets. Now he does have 12 targets over the first 2 weeks and 83 total yards between the 2 weeks. So I'm not very high on him, but I just want you to keep an eye out. Just keep an eye on him, see how things progress over the next couple of weeks, and maybe he is a guy that we have to take a look at adding. But when you have Landry, you have Michael Thomas, you have Chris Olave, when Kamara gets back, there's really not going to be enough targets left over for him, but I wanted to include him anyway for much deeper leagues. Now, it's time to move on to the streaming portion of our episode where we talk about a few guys that you could stream at the quarterback and defensive special team positions. For quarterback, Carson Wentz from Washington. He's a top 5 quarterback right now, and he leads the league in passing touchdowns. He's going to get Philadelphia coming up this week. Philadelphia, as of this recording, had not played yet because we record this before Monday Night Football. But that's a defense that got shredded a little bit by the Detroit Lions in week 1. Plenty of weapons there for Carson Wentz, and he's looking like his former MVP candidate itself. Mitchell Trubisky, they're going to get Cleveland. I don't love a Thursday night matchup, but Cleveland was just burned by Joe Flacco last week. Speaking of Joe Flacco, Cincinnati just lost to Cooper Rush. So why don't we take a look at Joe Flacco as well going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, this is another quarterback, but yeah, he doesn't sound great, but he's got so many weapons around him. They're going to make him look a lot better than maybe what he is. And then Jimmy Garoppolo. I hate to see his name on here because it means that, yes, Trey Lance is done for the season after having that ankle dislocation, the same injury that ended up costing Dak Prescott a year. It's going to cost Trey Lance his first full season, unfortunately. Jimmy Garoppolo is going to step in. I mean, bad news that they lost Trey Lance, but good news that they were able to keep Jimmy G because he steps back into his role. Not the best matchup in the world against Denver, but you love the weapons around him, just like some of these other guys. Yes, they might not be the greatest quarterbacks that we want to run out there, but they are guys that have a lot of weapons around them that could make things work. 2 defenses in particular I'm taking a look at this week. It's Kansas City against Indianapolis and Baltimore against New England. Kansas City, the Colts offense has not been great, and especially if Pittman is going to be out, this makes Kansas City an even better matchup going up against Indianapolis. If they can stop Jonathan Taylor in the run and make them one-dimensional, they should be able to handle Matt Ryan through the air. And Baltimore, after getting absolutely shredded by the Miami offense, probably going to get dropped in some leagues, but they got New England coming up, and New England is not nearly as explosive. They don't have the weapons. They don't have the ability that the Miami Dolphins have. Baltimore should bounce back this week against New England. Now, something I have not done the first couple of weeks is throw up some players to drop, but we are going to do it this week, and I'm going to throw out the caveat that we're not absolutely dropping these players right now, but they might be inching towards guys that we need to be done with. And the first guy up is going to be Rashad Penny, and this hurts, okay? But Kenneth Walker just came back. And if you're going to do a timeshare with Rashad Penny and Kenneth Walker, To me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to hold on to Rashad Penny, especially if Seattle continues to play from behind. If they cannot get in any positive game script, they're not going to be able to run the football. And this is an offense that may not allow them to do that. And because of that, over the coming weeks, we're probably going to move Rashad Penny back to the bench. But if things start to get worse, we might have to move on from him. Isaiah Pacheco from the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, CEH has proved over the first 2 weeks that the running back that we thought that they drafted a couple of years ago was still there. But we didn't know coming into the season if he was even going to get that opportunity. He hadn't proved himself. Now, he has had some injury issues. So Pacheco is a guy that if you own CEH, I'll keep Pacheco stashed right now in case something were to happen. But for those of you that own him that don't have CEH, I don't know if you really need to keep him. He only played like 4 snaps this past week. So he's not even getting on the field enough, let alone getting enough touches. Mike Davis and Kenyon Drake, Baltimore can't run the football to save their lives, and if they do, it's Lamar Jackson doing it. Neither of these guys are fantasy relevant right now. Sky Moore from Kansas City, I mean, he's not even getting on the field. I think he played, if I remember correctly, it might have been like 2 snaps or 3 snaps this past week. So he's also not getting an opportunity, just like Pacheco is. We've seen the other guys, Hardman. I know a lot of people are upset with Juju Smith-Schuster. If you're not a member, I did a video breakdown of him the other day to show everybody not to worry. There were some really great pieces in that video. So consider becoming a member so you can see those film reviews that we do that really go outside of all the numbers that we talk about here. But Hardman, MVS, CEH, Travis Kelce, all these guys getting work in the passing game. It has not allowed Sky Moore any type of an opportunity yet. Devontae Parker for New England. There's not enough passing going on in that offense. He's the guy that's been banged up. If you've still got Devontae Parker out there, he's like 40% owned right now. I'm getting rid of him. I'm done with him for the season. And Kadarius Toney, Kenny Galladay's not on here because I think people already started to kind of move on from him. But Kadarius Toney and Kenny Galladay, I'm done with them both. Kadarius Toney was barely even on the field anymore this week than he was the past week, and he's still not a big part of the game plan. Yeah, he could have a huge week in a week or two, and you might be saying, man, I really wish I hadn't dropped him, but that's not something continuous I see happening over the coming weeks. But there you go, our week 3 waiver wire video. Do me a favor, hit that like button for me. If you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, you got to subscribe. And in the comments down below, if you're thinking about dropping anybody that was not on this video, ask me. This is what we did last week. I told you all to ask me about dropping certain players, and I would get to as many as I could. I believe I got to answer quite a few of them last week and say, hey, don't do that, or absolutely, I'm good with that. Do the same thing. Leave a comment below in this video if you have got a guy that you're thinking about dropping, and let me know if he's not on this video so I can give you a little bit of feedback on that. But appreciate everybody tuning into this video. Hopefully you're having a great weekend. Hopefully your fantasy team did well. Hopefully Monday Night Football is excellent. And I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.